Are you interested in strain and monotony and want it included in your Power BI reporting? Well, in this week's Power BI for Sports Science tutorial, I'll show you how to calculate them and include them in your training load monitoring. So let's get started. If you're finding my videos for the first time, make sure you hit like and subscribe below, as well as hit that notification bell icon so you're notified of future videos. So in this week's video, as I said, we're going to look at training, strain, and monotony. And these are two older concepts, I guess, in training load monitoring. If you haven't heard of them before, I have a couple of articles for you to look at. And the first one is on simplyfaster.com, and they talk through what training monotony is and sort of where it kind of came from and what it's used for. And as a brief overview, training monotony is essentially the variation in your training and how, monotonous it is and how similar it might be. Whereas the strain is your training load times your monotony. And that's kind of the strain it will put on your body, essentially, is the way of looking at it. So these are some concepts that have been used for quite a while, and this is quite a well thought out article, so I encourage you to take a look at it if you're not sure about it. But it was sort of first used essentially by Carl Foster in an article way back in 1998, looking at athletes training in reference to overtraining syndrome. And he recorded their monotony as the daily mean divided by standard deviation and strain as a load times the monotony. So these are two things that have been used for quite a while and are some concepts that if you haven't used before or haven't looked at, maybe it's something you might want to include in your training monitoring system that you have. So if we go back to Power BI, what we've used before is obviously the acute chronic workload, and this is, I guess, the more recent version of training load monitoring that's been used, and it's very similar in terms of more so helping to try and identify overtraining. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a few little changes to what we have here in our ACWR calculation, and that's going to give us our training monotony, and then we're going to use that to find our strain. So let's get started straight away. We'll head over to Tabular Editor here, and what we're going to do is we are going to grab the calculation for our 7-day load here, because this is going to be exactly the same. So if we go and we'll call this training monotony, and we're going to put this as a variable here, and we're going to go load. And the main thing we're going to change here is average instead of sum. Let me just put that all in capitals. And then the next thing we need is we're going to need our standard deviation for the same period of time. So we're going to do the same thing, but instead of sum, we're going to have standard dev and .p. So those are the two things, very simple. What we're going to need to do is we're going to grab a value, and all we're going to do is go load underscore. We're going to do this actually the proper way. So we're going to use DAX, and we're going to go underscore load underscore SD in close brackets, and we're just going to return that value. I'm going to see what this value looks like when we first have it. So we'll see if this loads in, and we've got it down here. So if I add it to my ACWR graph, for instance, you can kind of see it here along the way. But what you'll see at first is that the further we go, the higher the number gets, and eventually it just disappears. So what we're going to do is we are going to say if, and here we're going to put an if, the value is greater than 10, just give me 10, otherwise give me the value. And this is one way of just putting a cap on your strain, or your monotony, I apologize, as this is a value that can be quite high. So what you would see here is you've got your value there all the way along. Anytime it tries to peak above, it won't. So if we just change our axes here, and let's just make it say 4 instead, we can see there approximately where our strain values are. But one of the things that you can see easily from this view is that it does kind of mimic your ACWR quite a bit. So you've got the same kind of flow And there's a little dips, but there's a greater spikes, I guess, when you look at your training monotony. The dips are very similar, but sometimes you'll get these bigger spikes here. So 1.9, you can kind of see that it looks the same. So now that we have that, let's create our strain. And so what we'll do is we'll just create a new measure here, and we'll just call this strain. And all this is going to be is we're going to take the same value that we created just before. So we're going to go var load equals, put this in, and we're just going to put our average back again. And then our second one, we're just going to call this, we'll call this monotony again. And we're just going to drag in our measure from before, and our value will now be our underscore load times our monotony. And we're going to return that value. Oops. So if we save that, and then we've got that value here. So now if we say add it here instead, and let's just add it as a separate column value, and we'll make sure that they're side by side for now. And you can kind of see roughly there, so our average 5722, and then it's 33,000. If we look on our first day, it's quite high. So you can see it's quite high. It's going to be popping quite high, quite a lot. And so if we remove our total distance here, take out our ACWR, and we put our training monotony as our line, let's just make sure that our y-axis and our secondary is not as high. So let's make this say 4 like we did before. Let's go a little bit higher. Let's go to 10. Let's go a little bit lower. So we're not getting above 10 today. So here we go. So here you can kind of see is if we look at our line, it does kind of mimic some of our values. Some of these through here might be quite high in terms of the actual load, but at this point in time, our monotony isn't too bad. But then it jumps up and there's a little spike. But the main one we have is here in the middle here. Our monotony gets quite high, and so the strain is a lot higher as well. And then the same here, you can see these sort of dips and highs. So as you can see, there can be, in terms of the spikes, can be some big differences depending on the monotony that you have and the value that you have on your monotony and your daily load. So one way of sort of adapting that a little bit, it might be just to look at this on a weekly value. So what we could do here is we could just change our day value here at the start to a week. So if we go start of week, and then you can see that they're not as bad, but you still get a good idea of what it's looking like at the time. So here you can kind of see that is a bad week. So what you might do is click your drill down, and you can drill down into that week and see, okay, it's quite high, it's at 4. But then you also have the option here to just drill in and see everything. So there we have the ACWR in comparison to our training monotony and strain. And as we said, we've already talked about so far, is that you can see there are some similarities in what they kind of show, and they do look very similar along the way. So you can see these spikes are falling in exactly the same places. But this is one other tool that you might want to use in your monitoring toolbox, and it's something that might be useful for you to be able to track your players along the way and if they're heading towards overtraining. So if you've liked this video, please make sure you hit like and subscribe below. Also share it around your friends if you think they might be interested as well. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next time, where we will continue to power performance through data. Thank you.